so you guys understand what I'm talking about. Okay?
So meiosis two.
So meiosis one, what happens is you have one cell, right? Which splits up into two cells. This was meiosis one. Now this cell splits up into two cells. So this was 46, this is 46, this is 46, this is 23, 23, 23, 23. And this is now meiosis 2. Does that make sense?
Did you say it was only germ cells though for meiosis 1? Is that what?
So meiosis entirely, meiosis 1 and meiosis 2 only occur in germ cells. So eggs and sperms only contain meiosis. Okay? Meiosis 1 is, or meiosis 1 is where a haploid turns into another, diploid turns into another diploid. So we started out with one precursor cell, which is spermatogonia. Spermatogonia turned into primary spermatocytes. Now they're both diploid still, 46 chromosomes. Once you have produced primary spermatocyte, now you start producing haploid cells, and which is meiosis 2. But meiosis 1, it looks exactly the same as mitosis. But mitosis occurs within non-germ cells, meaning skin, hair, liver, kidney. Does that make sense?
So in sperm, it only is meiosis.
Sperms and eggs, it's only meiosis or meiosis. But there's meiosis 1, meiosis 2. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, a sperm has many parts, each with a different function. A is acrosome. Acrosome. Acrosome actually contains enzymes for fertilization. Enzymes for fertilization. Okay? B is the head, which contains the genetic material. C is the middle piece, which contains the mitochondria. And mitochondria is needed for energy production. So the fructose that the seminal vesicle released, the mitochondria will take that and convert it into energy for the sperm. D is the tail, which is for the motility, okay? And the sperm has a whip-like motion. You take a belt, have you swing it, that's how a sperm moves.
Middle what?
Piece. This is called the middle piece, which is actually full of mitochondria.
And the tails, what?
What do you mean, what are they? They're just, they're tails, they're for movement, motility. Or you could call it flagellum. Now we're going to talk about the female genital tract. Now, as you saw, the male has external, females have external, as well as internal, same as that. Now, A is the clitoris. Now, in females, clitoris is the erectile tissue. Now, every single person in here, okay, you were born as a girl. Depending on what hormones were released, either you turned into a male or you turned into a female, or you stayed as a female, okay? So depend on what hormones were secreted due to our X or Y chromosomes. Basically, certain hormones were secreted, certain hormones were not secreted. If the fetus had a Y chromosome, certain hormones were secreted, which caused the fetus to develop as a boy. Where if you had two X's and no Y's, then you remain as a female. Okay, so everybody starts out as a female. Now, in males, the clitoris actually turns into the penis. So it elongates and turns into a penis, where in female, it just stays as a small bud. In female, the clitoris is erectile tissue, in males, the penis is erectile tissue. Okay? Then you basically, B is the urethral opening. This is where the urethra opens up. Now, D is labia, majora or major. Okay, they're actually the folds, tissue folds. Okay,
Major and what you said?
labium, majora,
Oh.
or majora means major. Okay, and F is actually labium minora. Okay, now they're both tissue folds that cover the opening of the vagina. Now, in males, these tissue folds elongated and they turn into the scrotum, where in females it stayed as the tissue folds. Okay?
What was D?
Oh, labium majora. So there are two tissue folds, major and the minor, the majora and the minor.
Is that the minor? The D is the minor, right? Or the
No.
major?
This is the major, this is the minor. Okay? And then this is the vaginal opening. So E is the opening to the vagina. F is the minor, and then D is the major. C is the anus. So you have the clitoris, you have the urethra opening, the major, then you have the vaginal opening, and then right here you have the minor. Okay, now internal genital tract for a few. A is the ovaries. So female has two ovaries. This is the site where the eggs are produced. Now the egg is called an oocyte. O-O-C-Y-T-E, oocyte. B is the fallopian tube or the uterine tube. B is the fallopian tube or the uterine tube. Now the fallopian tube or the uterine tube actually are transport vesicles, not vesicles, transport vessels. Basically, the egg is released from the ovary and they enter the fallopian tube. And the fallopian tube basically takes the egg and transports it towards the uterus. Fallopian tube are not only the transport vessel. Fallopian tube is the site where fertilization occurs. So fertilization actually occurs within the fallopian tube. So somewhere in the midpoint, the fertilization occurs, so the egg is released this way, sperms come up, and they unite with the egg right here. And now the embryo is taken towards the uterus. Does that make sense? Now, the fallopian tube has these finger-like projections, okay, which are called fimbriae. Fimbriae. So the end of the fallopian tube that actually connects the ovaries are like finger-like projections. They cover up the ovary, therefore they pick up the released egg or the oocyte. Fimbriae. F-I-M-C. J is the vagina, which is the birth canal. I is the cervix, and that is the transition point between the vagina and the uterus. Okay? The cervix, I.
It's the what?
It's a junction, a transition between the vagina and the uterus. H is the uterine cavity. H is pointing to the uterine cavity. We already talked about this. Get rid of it. Okay, D is the entire uterus. So D is supposed to be kind of encircle the entire thing, which is the uterus. D is the uterus. Now the uterus is a pear-shaped organ. Okay, it's hollow from inside. Now we're going to go get more in detail about the uterus. The uterus has multiple layers, each with a different function. The innermost lining of the uterus, okay, which is E, is called the endometrium. It's basically epithelial tissue. It's epithelial tissue. Now, certain more information about the endometrium. It's epithelial tissue with glands. So the endometrium actually has glands within it. Okay. Endometrium is the layer that actually sheds during menses. So the endometrium during the menstrual cycle gets bigger, and then it will shed during menses. Okay. So the endometrium is epithelial tissue. It contains glands. The endometrium actually enlarges during the menstrual cycle, and during menses, that's the layer of the uterus that actually sheds. The embryo actually attaches to the endometrium. So implantation occurs to the endometrium. So implantation occurs on the endometrium or with the endometrium. So the embryo actually attaches to the endometrium. Uterus is a site where the baby will develop.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
The uterus is where the fetus will develop. F is myometrium. Myometrium. Now myometrium is smooth muscle. Myometrium is smooth muscle. This is the layer that actually contracts. So during labor, okay, for you to expel the baby, it's the myometrium that contracts. G is a perimetrium.
You said the myometrium is a smooth muscle, right?
Huh? No, the plexus consonant. It's not a wall. Perimetrium is connective tissue. Basically, the perimetrium encloses the entire uterus, plus it forms uterine ligaments. And these uterine ligaments hold the uterus in place. Okay? So uterus is suspended like this, and there's just ligaments coming in attaching. Okay? And these ligaments over time actually get weaker, and then the uterus starts to more drop. This is why in older women, the uterus is more low set or tends to protrude. Okay? Because these uterine ligaments that hold the uterus start to get weak. Okay? So the uterus is not attached to the pelvic wall, okay, completely. It's just basically something hanging in the middle, and you're just attaching a loop. So basically, let's say this projector, it didn't have something attached to the wall, okay? It was just hanging there, and you had one string going this way, one string going that way. And basically, that's how the uterus is, okay? It's not firmly attached to the pelvic wall. So therefore, if these strings actually get weak, it will drop, it will start dropping, right? Same thing. Now the menstrual cycle. Certain characteristic about it, I'm not going to get more in detail because I want to start the Jeopardy. So I'm going to just tell you the basics about menstrual cycle, and this is where we'll end the reproductive chapter. Now, before we get started, okay, what do males know about the reproductive or about the menstrual cycle? Let's see. What do they know? Any male? Doug? Chris?
Oh, it's the time when I stay in the garage.
You stay in the garage.
It's the sloughing of the endometrium.
So the endometrium sheds.
You got it.
Any other males? Anything else? Yes.
When the eggs are not fertilized, so they regenerate. So they shed the ones that are not fertilized.
Okay, so basically the eggs mature and it will be shed if it's not fertilized. Anything else? Okay, now females, what do you know about your own menstrual cycle?
Every 28 days.
Okay, classic scenario, every 28 days.
There's
What else?
different phases.
These different phases, good. What else?
Ovulation occurs 14 days before it starts. On the 14th day. 14th day before.
Ovulation occurs 14 days into the cycle, so at the midpoint,
Yes.
exactly, on the 14th day of a 28-day cycle. Okay? So ovulation occurs on the 14th day of a 28-day cycle. What else?
Is it like your temperature rises in a certain phase?
Your basal.
Yes, your temperature will rise as soon as you're going into the second phase and towards ovulation. So right around ovulation, your temperature rises. This is how certain tests can tell, are you ovulating at the moment?
How much? Like a degree
Oh,
or?
2-3 degrees. Okay. Not 101, 102, around 101, but you don't, it's not like a fever. It's not where you start feeling it's like 103 and what else?
Everyone's different. Some people's last short time, some people's last long.
So-
Some's heavy, 5 to 7 days.
28-day is not the it's a classic. Does that mean every single woman in
No.
here has a 28-day cycle? No. Okay, usually they don't. Okay. So, basically, menstrual cycle is the process in which our body or female's body is developing the egg, hoping there's a pregnancy. If there's pregnancy or if there's fertilization, then it will continue and develop into an embryo and then a baby is born. If there is no fertilization, then basically the egg denatures and everything is shed, whichever we've been preparing. Okay? Now, menstrual cycle usually starts at what age? When does a female? 14 is start pushing it, okay? So around like 10, 11. 10 is a little bit early, but let's say 10 to 11 when puberty starts. 10 to 11 is where a female starts a menstrual cycle. How long does a menstrual cycle last? Not a length, but how many years? When does a menstrual cycle not happen for a female?
Like 60s, right? Like post-menopause.
Postmenopausal, so menopause is when you have no more capacity. So usually mid-50s, okay? Not early 50s, again, ranges for a woman, but mid-50s, okay? 55 is usually when a woman will hit menopause. This is where her body is not able to produce anymore, okay? And then the woman after the menopause, that year is finished, which is called postmenopausal. Okay, so menopause is when everything's shutting down. So how many eggs do you think a female uses in her lifetime? From the point where she started menstrual cycle to the point where she hits menopause.
Not a lot.
Rough idea?
Uses or
Huh?
uses?
Or how many eggs do you think go through this process?
Like 500, maybe 600.
Okay, the big max 500, 600 eggs, right? How many eggs do you think a female is born with?
All of them.
It's all of them, but
None.
she's born with all of them. each ovary contains 1.3 million eggs. Therefore, combined, a female has 3 million eggs when she's born. But we only use max 500, 600 eggs. So we don't know why we are born with that many eggs. Okay, they're all precursors. They all have to develop. Okay. Now, basically, each ovary takes a turn. It's not that both ovaries go through this menstrual cycle at the same time. They both take turns. It's not that, okay, left one and then right one and then left one and right. No, it's not that synchronized. It's maybe 3 months it'll be left, and another 5 months it might be the right. Okay? But it's not that both of the ovaries at the same time go through the menstrual cycle. I mean, there are occasions that happens. There's one actually contraceptive pill. Now it's banned. But that time when the female came off that contraceptive pill, basically what happened is it suppressed the ovaries so much that both of the ovaries started ovulating, okay, going through the menstrual cycle, and usually the females had triplets or something, okay? Yeah, that's why that drug was banned. I don't remember the drug's name.
I have a question. So when the eggs are released and say fertilization occurs, so how does that with the males, like with, like say, is it only when you're on your period is when the pregnancy occurs, or just any time, like?
So we'll talk about when I
When eggs
explain to you.
released. Oh,
When I
okay.
explain you more detail, ask me then if it
Yeah.
doesn't answer your question.
You said each ovary makes how many eggs?
No, when a female is born, each ovary already contains about 1.3 million. So 1.3, so or 1.5, so kind of 3 million already precursor cells. Okay, those precursor cells, as a male had to go through spermatogenesis to mature the sperms, females have to go through that same well. It's called oogenesis, okay, which is the process where the eggs develop. Now, it's not that every single month only one egg starts to develop. It's 15, 20 start to develop. And ovulation is a time where the follicle will burst, releasing the egg. And I'll explain what a follicle is in just a sec, okay? But all of these eggs are at a race, okay? It's first come, first served. Whichever egg reaches that final stage first, that's the egg that's going to be released. Does that make sense? So 20 of them might actually start the developing process somewhere, you know, one is slow, one is fast, and then at ovulation, whichever one is the most dominant, or not dominant, the fully matured, will be released. Okay?
Can ovulation happen more than once throughout the cycle?
So, this is basically day 1 to day 28. This is a typical 28-day cycle, where the 14 days ovulation. 14 days ovulation. Okay? Now, the first 4 to 5 days is called menses. Menses is where the female is actively bleeding. Okay? Menses is where the female is actively bleeding. The first day of menses marks the starting of a new menstrual cycle. Okay? So bleeding does not indicate you're at the end of your cycle. The first day the female sees blood is her first day of a new cycle.